Protesters in Minneapolis broke into a church service last Sunday and disrupted the service because one of the pastors works for ICE. Is this something that people should be allowed to do? Is protest supposed to inflict trauma? On this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 134. And I know what you're thinking as you're listening to this. You're thinking, when are these guys going to get back to theology? When are they going to get back to doctrine? We are going to do that, but it seems like the world, and I know we're only in January in 2026 already, but a lot of things are happening. So we're trying to, like we said, we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. So we also deal with politics, theology, and it seems like politics has kind of been on the front burner. And what happened last week, as we're cutting it, and as the kids would say, the cool kids, protesters invaded a church service last Sunday in Minneapolis. They disrupted the service because one of the pastors works for ICE, the ICE agency. And so we were going to ask Brandon a couple of things. Pastor Brandon, by the way, he's Pastor Brandon, I'm Pastor Keith. Is it wrong for a pastor to be involved with law enforcement? And also, is it okay for protesters to break into a church service and demand that that pastor step down and also join the cause of getting ICE out of their city? Is that something that protesters should be allowed to do? So that's where we're going today, and we will get into theology and doctrine because Pastor Brandon really loves that stuff, and I enjoy it too. But politics, they seem to be taking over everything. What do you think, Pastor Brandon? It's just a crazy world that we live in, and we're only in January of 2026.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is that I had just said Sunday morning, I told you that I wanted to get back to, I'd like to, let's do some stuff on theology and doctrine. And that was, Sunday morning. And then Sunday afternoon, we find out that this occurred. Actually, as we're talking, it's probably going on. And, then we, obviously realize that that's now what we have to address it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that we are forced to address it. And, and I don't like to talk a lot about, I don't like to have politics be the dominating subject of our podcast. I don't want that, but I do realize that we need to be able to speak to the things that are happening, because I know that people who are listening to us have these questions. And so we need to bring a, biblical understanding to these world events the best that we possibly can.
And we agree, at our church, we want to just take the Bible and exposit it, what it says. And so politics is not a really big part of our church services. But when the outside world brings politics into your church, you kind of have to deal with it then, right? Like what happened in Minneapolis, this I forget the name of the church, but they were starting their service. And then I think it was right when the pastor was getting up to preach, there's 25 or 30 people stand up and start screaming. That is that's something that you have to deal with. It's bringing politics into the church.
Well, for sure. And in this situation, I think we need, even though this didn't happen to us, I think we need to address it, and we need to denounce that type of behavior. I think we need to be clear in that. But I think we also need to shepherd our people to understand, how should they be responding to this? How should they be thinking it through? And also, if it were to happen in our church, we need to think about, what should our response be? What is a biblical response to that situation? Should we do what they did? Obviously the pastor there was caught off guard, and, he was getting up, my understanding is he was getting up to preach when they began their protest. And so, basically, I mean, I think he was caught off guard, and maybe I don't know. I mean, his response was fine as far as I was concerned. Obviously, he was very nervous, it seemed like, and wasn't quite, sure what to do, it seemed like, although he did, I think, call them to leave and do ultimately all the right things in that way. But yeah, I mean, we need to be prepared, I guess is what I'm saying, because it's easy to get caught off guard, and we don't want to get caught off guard. The chances of something like that happening in our church is probably pretty low, because we're not very visible. We're not big. But can it happen? Yeah. I mean, I think we'd be foolish to think that it couldn't.
Yeah. And as the time that we're cutting this podcast, the woman who led it, I think her name is Armstrong. She calls herself a reverend. I can't even pronounce her first name, Nakinum or something, whatever.
Nakima, I guess.
Nakima. She's pretty popular in the Minneapolis area. She was one of the BLM leaders and organizers there back in 2020. And so she's claiming that, and I guess it's hard to even know where to start when we start talking about this, but we might as well start at the beginning. Does the First Amendment give people the right to go in and protest while a church service is going on? That's what they're claiming. They have the right to do that.
Yeah, the simple answer is no. I mean, I guess you want more than that.
Well, because there is also the freedom of religion, right? We have a right to go worship.
Yeah. I mean, let's kind of break that down. The First Amendment does protect our right to worship, and it also protects the right of, the freedom of expression. And so we have a First Amendment right to gather as the body of Christ and proclaim the truth of God's word. We have the right to do that, and no one has the right to stop us from doing that. And so, so if we break that down, then you ask about the protest. Well, in this country, it's legal to peacefully protest, right? I can go out if I want to with a sign on the side of the road in a public place and, chant whatever I want to chant, and that's protected under the First Amendment. And so, that's not a problem. I can go on private property as long as I'm invited on private property, or as long as I'm not trespassing on private property. I want to be careful and the listeners will understand why I'm being careful with that. As long as I'm not trespassing on that private property in my protest, then I have the right to be there and protest. If, as an example, if someone invites us into some place in order to protest, then, the problem is that it doesn't do you any good to protest on property that, where people agree. And so that's why I think these protesters are, want to push the envelope as to where they protest. But so the act of protesting doesn't violate, actually is protected under the First Amendment. But where it crosses the line is when they go onto private property, trespassing on private property and carry out that protest. It also crosses the line if there's violence involved. It's not, that violence isn't protected under the First Amendment.
Yeah, and they would say that they weren't violent. They just were screaming and swearing and yelling, but they weren't violent. But also what they're claiming, and this is an interesting question, they're saying that this is God's house. So God's house cannot be a private property, that it's open to everyone. And so they're claiming that. You can't really say that this is private property. And I don't know if they understand,
No, they don't understand common sense.
What that really means.
Well, they don't, there's a lack of common sense in that, because, I have every right. If someone comes into my home, as an example, and I know you said, they're saying that church is not private property, but if someone comes in my home, I have every right to expect them to behave in a certain way, that there's an acceptable range of activity, that I would allow in my home. I wouldn't, as an example, and maybe this is too crass, but I wouldn't allow someone to defecate in the hallway, so to speak. I wouldn't allow those things, and I wouldn't allow them to yell at my kids, and I wouldn't allow them to threaten my family in any way, verbally or physically. And so, that's just you can't allow that. Now, the question of whether or not that's a public place, and there is a sense that it is public. There's a sense that they're right, that it is a public place, because you and I have a public ministry. When we preach the word, when we say, "Thus saith the Lord," we have to expect, and we actually, put our stuff on social media, but we have to expect that can get repeated, that can be heard and get repeated. And we actually welcome that. We want that, what we say to go out and actually be used by the Lord to help people. Like this podcast, we're recording it. We want that. And we also want people to come in and hear the truth, right? We want them we invite the public into our church service to hear the truth. Now, there are actually some Christians who would say the church service is only for believers or should only be for believers. And I'm not one of those guys. But, drawing the same analogy, there should be an expectation when someone comes in that there's a decorum that they need to live according to. We don't disrupt the service. Disruption of the service would be unwelcome, and that we would be in our rights to say, you can't be disruptive. And why does that, when you get to whether it's private property or not? Yeah, I mean, I think that legally it would be considered private property, and I'm not a legal expert at all, and so I'm not sure, what the actual protection would be legally, but it definitely, from my understanding, it's not a public place in that sense. It's a public place in the sense that we would welcome people in, but we have every right as elders and as leaders of the church, we have every right to tell someone that they are no longer welcome.
Absolutely. What they were claiming is it's okay for them to show up and act out like this in the house of worship because ICE agents show up to private citizens' homes and arrest them. And so they're trying to say, we're going to turn the tables and we're going to do what ICE agents are doing, but we're going to do it to the church. And so I don't think you can compare the two because one is law enforcement and one is just normal, everyday people protesting at, like you said, a church service, which is technically private property. But again, as a church, we welcome people in. We can't just say, well, you don't look right, you can't come in. We are welcoming. And hopefully people that come are searching. They're searching for the truth. They're searching for understanding. What does the Bible say? I like you said, I agree with you. I think church is for believers, but I also don't mind non-believers coming in and searching for truth and trying to understand, are these guys right or am I right? Is the Bible right or from the way I was living, is that the right way to go? But to come in and actually plan on disrupting is wrong. I don't care how you can't. I don't know how you can dress it up any way you want. I guess the saying is you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. But no matter what you're saying, it's a disruption, and I think it's wrong. It definitely needs to be protected, church services.
Yeah. I mean, I think an example would be, I use the example of a home, but a more parallel example there would be, a grocery store. If I walk into a grocery store and I start dumping stuff in the aisles and, yelling at the customers and doing that thing, they have every right. It's a public place.
That's true. That's a good analogy.
Because I'm in a public place in that sense doesn't mean I have the right to do what I want to or do as I please. I can, if the store owner doesn't want me there protesting, as an example, if there's a protest, they're not allowed to go inside and protest if the owner doesn't want them there. So it would be the same thing as a church.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good analogy. It's kind of the same thing, right? It's open to the public, but yet there's a set of rules that you can't just start throwing things.
Yeah, it's private property held open to the public for a limited purpose. And in the case of a grocery store, it's for someone to come in and buy and purchase groceries and do business with the grocery store. Same thing with a shopping mall. It's for people to come in and do business with whatever shops are part of that mall. And so, for a church, it's primarily for believers, primarily for the members of the church. Primarily, that's who we are focused on. But we wouldn't say that the general public isn't welcome. They are welcome, but they're only welcome if they do what we would consider to be right and proper biblically.
Yeah, so these protesters, they were using the Bible to defend what they were doing because they're saying that if Jesus was on earth right now, he would be marching with them, that he would be in favor of not arresting illegal immigrants who are convicted of crimes. And so how can one group have a different interpretation of scripture from another group that has this, that we're reading the same Bible, but we have two different views on immigrants and how to handle immigrants who have come here illegally and committed crimes?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the difference is one is exegesis and the other is eisegesis. So meaning that we would argue, that there's borders, that we would say that the foreigner is welcome, but he has to live according to our laws. And part of our laws is that it would be, you're required to pursue citizens or pursue being a resident, and then, you can remain a green card resident if you want, or you can pursue citizenship. But that's, there is a path for staying here legally. If you violate that, then you no longer have that. You don't have that right, and I think those things can be defended. I think we've done it before. Those things can be defended biblically. That that the nations do have boundaries. The nations have a right to set their own laws, and I think that's a biblical right the nations have. And you can't just go into a nation and violate their laws. Especially, I'm speaking in a lot of cases. They're coming in, they're raping our women. They're they're violating the law. They're going against cultural norms. They don't have the right to, they don't have a right. They're not protected in doing these things.
Let's just talk a little bit. I want to ask you about Leviticus 19. And that seems to be their verse that they go to. And they want that to be the doctrine of every country, every state, every city, and every church. But when we read Leviticus 19, verses 33 and 34, it talks about being, welcoming the stranger. These are laws for Israel, the nation of Israel. And God chose Israel to be a holy people to represent him to the earth, which we understand. It's a good thing to be nice to people, but I don't think it's saying that there shouldn't be any, like they can do anything they want.
No, even in that, the expectation was that they would obey the laws of Israel, right? And in that situation, it was Yahweh's commandments and his statutes, the ones that he had given them for people to obey, for his people to obey. And so when someone came into Israel, yes, they were welcomed as a sojourner and a foreigner. And, they didn't have, modern immigration policies that we have today. But they were welcomed, and we should be welcoming to the foreigner. But we should expect them to assimilate. We should expect them to learn our language. We should expect them to obey our laws. That should be an expectation. And if they choose not to do those things, if they choose to disobey the law, if they choose to, not assimilate, there needs to be consequences for those things.
Because, open borders, it's not a good idea to just have no borders, just say, come on in, whoever you are. We don't know who you are. So come on in. How do we know who you are? I know this has happened, right, where there's been Venezuelan, these gangs, whatever they are, and Mexican gangs, drug lords and all these things, they come in and they just, disrupt everything. And we can't have that. And like you were saying, I think it disrupts schools. Kids are coming in and it'd be great to have them, but they don't know English. And so now you have to spend all this time teaching them English and trying to teach them what rules are. They don't have rules. They have different rules where they come from. They don't understand. Driving even is a disaster. They just are given a license. They're not even taking tests. They're not even showing the rules of the road. And so it's just a scary scenario. I think as far as a country is concerned, and we've talked about this, we see it in even Revelation during the end times, towards the end, that there are still nations. There are nations and cultures that are different. It's not just one big happy world as we go forward. So it's interesting that I think these guys are trying to have no borders. They want a one world government, and it's taking shape, but it's going slow, slow for them.
I think even the most allergic to conspiracy theories would have to agree that at this point that it's clear that allowing the immigrants into our nation at the level that the left has tried to mandate. They did, under Biden, they opened the border up. They flooded this country. I think even those who are not normally conspiracy theory people would have to be able to see that it's designed to destroy our nation. It's designed. It's a revolution. It's a bloodless revolution, and that they're fundamentally changing what our nation is by allowing all of these immigrants to come in unchecked and not expect them to assimilate to our society.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing, and we see it in, like we talked about this already in a podcast, in Seattle and Minneapolis, and I think now Virginia and New York City. Certainly there are these very heavy socialist people that are elected. And so we see this America wanting, these people want America to become this socialist, communist country. And I think in order to do that, they've already conquered entertainment. And we look at movies and things, and music. And so the government is kind of moving in that direction. So I think religion, churches, are next on their list, because Christianity and socialism and communism don't go together, obviously. And so maybe what we're seeing is the start of going into churches now and disrupting. This might become more common, or do you think this is like one and done because this is serious?
Anytime I try to answer something like that, I always get it wrong. So I will answer with, I don't know. There are people, we listen to a guy, Spencer Smith, who I think would say that, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is just starting it. If the government doesn't respond in the right way to this, that it's just going to continue to happen. And I would agree with that. I would agree with the assessment that if the government doesn't handle it properly, then what fear is there going to be to do these things again? I mean, these people need to be, they need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. They need to be thrown in jail. They have disrupted a sacred worship service, and that they are completely in the wrong for it. And I would even go so far as to say that Don Lemon, if it's demonstrated that he had any prior knowledge, which obviously he did, and that because of the inflammatory stuff that he said while he was in there, I think he also needs to be prosecuted and sent to jail if he's found guilty. And because it's not. Is it going to continue? I think it would if there's no consequences, or if the consequences aren't heavy. These people need to be made an example of, and that you don't. This is a bridge too far. You don't act like that. And the truth of the matter is that I think that I would argue that Trump would be well within his rights to invoke the Insurrection Act, and go into Minnesota and bring law and order to that place.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because are they egging him on to do that so they can have more more protest, more, see, we told you he's a dictator?
I think the problem is that you can't negotiate with these people.
Yeah,
that's the issue, that there is no negotiation. It's either their way or that's it.
So would Jesus be in favor of that? You think he would?
Over what?
I mean, this is kind of a simplification of what they're saying, but they're talking about opening jails and prisons and letting immigrants who have committed crime out. They should be allowed to go free because they are visitors here. They're claiming Leviticus would say, just leave them alone. They're living their lives.
Well, yeah, the problem is that just because you're a visitor doesn't make you immune to our laws. That's the problem. I mean, that's the problem with that way of thinking. Yes, the Bible says welcome the foreigner, but it doesn't give the foreigner a right to do what he wants. He has to obey the laws of the land. He had to obey the laws of Israel. As a matter of fact, I would argue biblically that they had to, they certainly couldn't come in and protest and say, Yahweh is not, they weren't able to do that, right? They weren't able to come in and do that. They could, yeah. So, as a matter, I think didn't we do a podcast on this?
I think we did, yeah. I think we did talk about it, but what you're saying is the eisegesis is reading into what you wanted to say, whereas exegesis is just saying what it says, and this is what it means.
Yeah, for sure that, yes, exegesis and it to say, and then you have on the other hand you would have eisegesis, which is what you want it to say, and you're trying to prove what you believe. So, the Bible is clearly pro-immigration. Yes, Leviticus 19:33-34, absolutely. Deuteronomy 10:18 and 19 is another one. Ruth 1-4, the story of Ruth. I mean, she was a Moabite immigrant, and she was shown favor. In Matthew 25, Jesus said, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me," and but it's not against pro-immigration regulation. So, Numbers 15, for the assembly there shall be one statute for you, and for the stranger who sojourns for you. You and the sojourner shall be alike before the Lord. So they're welcome, but they're expected to live under Israel. They were expected to live under Israel's law. And, there was one law for everyone. There wasn't these multiple standards depending on who you are. There's one law. And it's the same thing in the United States. Exodus 12:48 and 49, if a stranger shall sojourn with you and would keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, then he may come near and keep it. So we see that even in worship, there were clear boundaries and requirements for that participation in Israel. This is clear. Acts 17:26, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined the allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place. So God himself is the one who establishes these borders and, what actually constitutes a nation. In Romans 13, the government has the authority to maintain justice and order, to bear the sword. And so, absolutely. But the Bible is also pro-assimilation, Ruth 1:16 and 17, your people shall be my people, your God, my God. And so what we see there is Ruth exemplifying this assimilation, that she's embracing Israel's God and becoming fully a part of his people. Circumcision, Exodus 12 was required for participation in Israel's religious life. And so, Nehemiah 13, this is a tough one. Nehemiah rebuked intermarriage with pagan nations, not because of the ethnicity, but because of the danger of religious and moral compromise. And so these are clear biblical things that are there that help us see that, yes, we do welcome the sojourner. We do welcome the foreigner, but we do expect them to obey our laws, and we expect them to assimilate and not create problems.
How does this work where should this so-called, Reverend Armstrong, this woman who says she's ordained, should she have the right to dictate who and who should not be a pastor or elder of a church? Like, what gives her the right to do that? She would say that Jesus went in and overturned the tables, and so now she's doing this because she believes this is a false church. They're preaching a false gospel. So what I'm trying to say is, who gives them the right to do that? And is that a right that they have, that they should be allowed to go in and do that?
No, they don't have a right to do that. And I would say that, if I, as an example, I don't agree with the Mormons, but I don't have a First Amendment right to go in and tell them they're wrong. I mean, to disrupt their service. And I would never do that, even though I think they are a false religion. The Jehovah's Witnesses, same thing. It's a false religion, but I don't have the right to go in and disrupt their services just because they're false. And neither do they have the right just because they disagree with their the church's stance on immigration. They don't have the right to go in and disrupt the service.
Maybe we need to talk about, I think she's pretty much, we would agree that she's a social gospel reverend rather than a true gospel.
I mean, again, eisegesis versus exegesis.
Right.
She has an agenda that she wants to prove biblically, and she wants to use the Bible as a weapon to prove her point of view. And that's not how That's not how it works.
Do you think it's sinful for an ICE agent man to be an elder or pastor of a church? Do you think that's a sin or wrong, or how would we look at that?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is that 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1 give the biblical qualifications of an elder. One of those qualifications is to have a good reputation with those outside. There are other qualifications. And so I think a man needs to be judged when it comes to being an elder. He needs to be judged by those character qualifications. The question is that can he have a good reputation if he's involved with the immigration, ICE, if he's involved that way? And I think the answer is yes, as long as he is abiding by what's right and good and not doing things that are illegal, that he's working within the bounds of the law. Then even though there are going to be people who say that he's doing these evil things, that doesn't make it so. It's not something that would actually stick, for people who actually, care about the truth. And so that would not disqualify him. Now, if he was doing things within that job that, let's just say he was dragging people out by the hair of the head and he was, beating people and, doing things that are ungodly, then absolutely he's disqualified and should be told to step down. But I think, the answer is that no, just being an ICE agent doesn't mean that he should step down. Now, would it be wise in that situation for him to step down? I don't want to speak for him, and I don't know, his exact situation, and I don't know what I would do, but I don't think I would say it would be necessarily unwise for him to step down. That he could choose that because of the attention that he's drawing and because of the, work that he's doing, that it's better for the church that he not be an elder. Then I think that's something that I would support if we had an elder that was involved in ICE and there was, these things that were coming up and he just came to us and said, you know what, I think it's best for the church if I step down, at least for now, until things kind of pass. And I wouldn't be against that, but I wouldn't necessarily go to him and say, you have to step down. Now, would I have that conversation with him if it was happening, if it was creating problems? Yeah, I mean, I think I would have the conversation. I'd say, hey, so-and-so, look, we don't see anywhere you're violating Scripture, in terms of your character. There's nothing that we see that would stick. However, we think that you need to think about what it means for the church if you remain an elder, at least at this point. And maybe it may be wise for you to step down, for a time being. That's not necessarily forever. I mean, I think it would be until this passes, until things kind of simmer down, so to speak. I mean, I could see myself saying that. And I think I would be right biblically to do that.
And that's just because of the safety for the church, right?
Sure.
Because because being an ICE agent isn't a sin. It's not wrong.
No.
I was going to ask you.
No more than it's wrong for somebody to be a part of the police department.
Right.
A Christian to be a part of the police department or be a part of the FBI or be a part of, the CIA. I mean, those things aren't inherently sinful. Can you do sinful things in those things? Yes.
Yeah.
But those things are not inherently sinful. I mean, could are there professions that it would be a Christian couldn't be a part of? And I would say, yeah, I think for sure. I mean, you wouldn't want to be a pornographic, actor, that, so to speak. We wouldn't want you to, as a Christian, I don't think that you would, you need to be careful with certain occupations. We wouldn't want a Christian working for an abortion clinic, for example. Mm. And so, there's definitely occupations that would be off limits for a Christian. And there's occupations that would be unwise for a Christian, that may not be inherently sinful, but they are unwise. And so, I think there is a potential that it would be unwise for him to continue to be an elder in that condition, but I'm not there. I don't know him. I don't know the church situation. And so if they don't have a problem with it, biblically, I don't see a problem with it.
Wouldn't you think that when all this started, that the elders of that church would have had the conversation that he is working for ICE, and hey, Bob or Tommy or whatever, maybe are you okay, or maybe he came to the pastor and said, should I? And the pastor might have said, I don't think you have to, and you know what I mean? Yeah. Step down or whatever.
We don't know that whether or not those conversations were had. I would hope so. I would hope that those kind of conversations would, maybe not everything that you just said, but that those kind of conversations would be happening, that they would be assessing the risk that they're dealing with when it comes to this. And him being a part of ICE and knowing what's going on, you would think that he'd be pretty aware of, that sort of thing. And I'd hope they would have those conversations, but I'm not there to say, did they or didn't they? I don't know.
And I think he was a coordinator. I don't think he was actually on the ground doing the arrest. I think he was coordinating where they would go and find these convicted guys. I think that's what it was. It's one of those things where unless you're in the middle of it, it's hard for us. We can sit here and, they should do this and they should have done that, or maybe they'll do this. It's really difficult when you're in the middle of the eye of the storm, right? That this church, it's too bad he's not a master's guy, because we would have went to school with him, so we could have had him on the podcast. But he's a Southern Baptist guy, so hopefully, and I think our prayers go out to him. It's going to be tough. I don't know, like next Sunday or this coming Sunday, what's going to happen there, but if more people will gather outside. And I think I mentioned when we started this podcast that arrests have been made. Some of these protesters are being arrested. So we were praying that this would deter this from happening, but who knows? These people are, I think, what we call, in the seminary biz, fruitcakes. We don't know, or are they demon possessed? I mean, these are. Yeah,
there's an author who wrote a book. I forget what his name is, but he wrote a book called Unhuman, and his whole point is that they've lost all touch of what it means to be human, and part of that, obviously, when there's the fallen nature of man, but these people have gone beyond that I shouldn't say beyond fallen. They've taken it to a point where basically they have become unhuman. They've become anti-human, and I think that's true, and I think that's why we're seeing these kind of things happen. That's going on.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I would think that, and I was going to ask you this question. They believe that protesting is meant to inflict trauma on people, and I don't think that's the definition of protest. What do you think of that? That it's supposed to inflict trauma?
Yeah, that's terrorism.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I don't know how that can be a protest. What's the difference between a protest and a riot then?
Yeah, terrorism is the use of violence or the threat of violence against civilians in the pursuit of political goals. So if I'm intimidating people, or if I'm threatening violence, or if I'm using violence, and I'm trying to intimidate them, even verbally, that's terrorism. That is the definition of terrorism. And it's not the definition of a legal, lawful protest.
Yeah, we can't have double standards, because we were talking about the legality of all this, and then we have this law called the FACE Act, right, which Bill Clinton signed, which limits protesting abortion clinics. You can't prevent someone from going in, and you can't even really pray anymore in front of them now. And we heard that I think there was 3 women who were sent to 40 years in prison because they were praying in front of an abortion clinic. So we can, why would it be wrong to pray in front of an abortion clinic, but not wrong to disrupt a church service? That makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And, part of it is because, everybody realizes that abortion clinic is private property. And as long as they are not breaking laws, the laws of the land, whether we agree with them or not, they have the right to be there. Now, do we have the right to go and stand in front of there and pray? And I could, if they ask us to leave the parking lot, then I don't think that we would have the ability that we should stay there. Or if they ask us if we're standing in front of we certainly don't have the right to, to block entrance and all that. But can we pray for them at people that way? I think I'm not an expert in that. That's an area. I'll leave that to Jeff Durbin and others. How they handle that. But yeah, I mean it there's some clear issues there when it comes to that it's a double standard is what you're getting at, is that they're trying to say it's not okay to do this over here, but it is okay to do this, and it's not true. That's a double standard.
Well, don't get me started on double standard. It's amazing how when you look at the world and people accuse other people of doing things, that they're doing the same thing. I mean, let's just take Don Lemon, for example. Don Lemon was he claims he was just a unbiased reporter who was reporting what happened, but he's saying that later on in an interview that this was a white church. It was a white entitled supremacist church. And so he felt that he had the right to go in and disrupt it. He's calling them entitled white people. But what is he doing? He's like an entitled black homosexual man going in. So it's just ironic how that happens. And
that's the definition of gaslighting.
Exactly. I mean, I hope something happens from that. Just by going in, because he claims to be a Christian, but he doesn't understand why this is not the right thing to do, to disrupt a church service, that they feel they have the right to do it. So who's privileged? Who's feeling more privileged?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Don Lemon is, he's a fruitcake, and Spencer Smith said he's headed straight for hell, and I agree with that assessment. He's on the path to hell and will be judged for what he's doing unless he repents. Yeah. And I pray that he does. I pray that he will turn to the Lord. And, he's trying to say that this was a legal and lawful protest, which is defined as a public demonstration where individuals express their views and objections peacefully without violating laws or regulations. Those kind of protests they're protected under the First Amendment, as long as they don't involve violence, trespassing, or other illegal activities. And they were clearly trespassing, but I would say that they were uttering threats as well. Verbal threats, and I think that is not protected under the First Amendment.
Yeah, we could do a whole nother podcast on how these protesters are just completely going the opposite of what they're saying they're doing. They're trying to be peaceful, but they're disrupting everyone's lives.
They literally are doing what they're accusing.
Yes.
They literally are violating the First Amendment rights and turning around and saying that if you say we're wrong, you're violating our First Amendment rights. And it's like, yeah, that literally are doing what they say that we're doing.
And they're claiming that Trump is Hitler and that ICE agents are his, brown shirts, the Gestapo, whatever. But what we're seeing now, and I don't know if you saw these, where these mobs of people are walking down the street, and if you look like an ICE agent or they come up to you and they say, "Are you for us or against us? Are you against ICE?" And if you say no, they will inflict harm on you. And it reminds me of, going back to Germany before the war, like if you were a Jewish person or you weren't part of the Nazi party, they would beat you up. And it's ironic how it's like they're doing the same thing that they're accusing Trump of doing.
Yeah. And every law-abiding citizen should stand against that and stand against that type of activity. And unfortunately, most people are too fearful to say anything. So the vast majority may be against it. And the problem is most of them won't say anything. And that's the problem that you get into, is that people have to be willing to stand for what is right. If, they have to be willing to stand for truth. And what happens is that these people shout you down and try to intimidate you. And most people, unfortunately, are easily intimidated. They're easily shouted down. And so, we as those who believe the truth have a responsibility to stand against these people and to stand against what they're saying and doing.
So as pastors, as shepherds, how do we protect our flock? What do we do if this happens? Let's say it happens in Grace Bible Church. what do we do? Do we kind of agree with them and say, yeah, we're with you guys. Go ahead. We're with you. You can leave and go to another church now. Or do we escort them out? Or do we just let them, say what they want to say and leave? Or do we call the police? I mean, what do you think we should do?
Well, I think we're definitely within our rights to have them physically removed. So if we have, and I know we have some guys in our church that are able to do that, and I would encourage it. That if someone is in that position, especially, uttering verbal threats or speaking in language that is not acceptable in a public worship, that we would have them physically removed. And so, I don't want to create, more. I wouldn't want to create more backlash, And so, if we can de-escalate it, I think that would be the first option, would be to try to de-escalate. And so in terms of, if you're talking about a large group of people that come in like this, I think that, because like in our body, if you had that, there'd be more of them than there is us, if that happens.
Yes.
Right. If that same scenario happened at Grace Bible Church, there'd be more of them than us. And so, it kind of changes the dynamic of it a little bit. But in general, I think that we're within our rights and should remove them physically if they do something like that. If someone does something like that, and we should call the law as soon as it happens. Someone should be on the phone to law enforcement, having them respond.
Should we, as Christians, just allow people to physically beat us up? Should we ever fight back? Should Christians ever use fisticuffs to, or what? How are we supposed to react? This church was very gentle. There was no pushback. They just simply got up and left and let these guys kind of take over the church. And what do we do as Christians?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, is it right at times for us to take up physical retaliation, or I shouldn't say retaliation, or if we should, defend ourselves? I think that for sure, if the women and children, in my mind, and the weaker of the people we have, if they're physically threatened in any way, then I would argue that we should respond with like force to them. So whatever that is. And so I think we would be within our duty. We would be duty bound to do that if they're threatening to, especially the children and, our women and those who are infirm, those who are older. I think we would be duty bound to handle that in a forceful way.
So if we have a lot of young kids and mothers. So if they're surrounding the mothers and screaming and swearing, and there was a church, Doug Wilson, I saw him come on and he talked about these people have done this to his church in Washington, D.C., and they actually used a bullhorn and put it in some poor guy's ear, and now he has broken eardrum because of that. So if they do that, if they're doing that to our wives and mothers of young children, and the children are there, we would have to intervene, right? We would have to jump in and
I think so.
Try to push them back. And if it led to an altercation, I guess we would. I don't know. Yeah, it's terrible that we even have to talk about stuff like this in America. You'd think in China or in Korea or somewhere else, this would be, but like we just talked about, is this coming? Is this going to be more? I can't see it stopping, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I think we have to realize that freedom is not the default, that oppression is the default, because we live in a sinful world. And, we need to fight. We have to fight for those freedoms. Because those who came before us fought for those freedoms, and we have to be willing to do so as well. Unfortunately, there's very few people who are willing to do so at this point. Most people want to live and let live. And I don't think that we are in a position to do that at this point.
It's crazy. And we could do a whole podcast on just the new phenomenon. I don't know if it's actually new, or we talk about feminism. I know we've done a podcast on the divine feminine and feminine. But what we're seeing here is in this protest in Minneapolis, it's a growing number of women are the ones that are leading and engaging in this. We just saw that Renee Good, woman who was shot and killed, sadly, she's trying to intervene. She's trying to prohibit ICE from doing what they're doing. And it just got a little out of hand there. And was she wrong to be doing it? Yes. So like two wrongs don't make a right. But again, all of that to say is that women are becoming more and more involved. And I've also saw the stats where women are now leaving their husbands. They're actually divorcing them because they are not angry enough at ICE. They are not supporting their anger with ICE. So they're leaving their husbands. I just don't know what's going on. There's just all this division between, we have division of the races. We have divisions of Republican and Democrats. And now we seem like we're going to have divisions between men and women. Where is this all going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, we know where it's going, that, Christ is going to come back and judge this world. How long it takes to get to that point, what the actual path is, who knows? Is it going to get better temporarily? Hopefully. I mean, that would be my hope. Is the Lord going to have to return to fix it? Well, yeah, ultimately, yes. And, I think we have to recognize and respond accordingly. And, I think things have changed. Things have changed fundamentally. We no longer live in the nation that you and I knew before. I know younger people may not see that, but this nation has fundamentally changed. And we are coming to the point where I heard someone say, I can't remember who it was, but someone say it's Christ or chaos. And I think that's where we have to be. Either we're going to, Christ is going to rule the nation ultimately, or it's going to be chaos. And what we're seeing is chaos. And, will there be a reprieve? I hope so. I hope that there will be. That's my prayer. But I also pray that the Lord would come quickly. So there's that.
Absolutely. And we're only in January. So what do you think 2026? You think this is like the worst of it and it's going to get better? Or do you think this is just the beginning? Or what do you think?
Well, I'll say that it's cold in Minneapolis. So I can only imagine what's going to happen when it warms up.
I heard, it's supposed to be 17 below this coming weekend and Monday, I think. So hopefully that'll keep the protesters, away from the churches on this weekend. But yeah, you're right. I don't know. I just heard this stat. The Family Research Council gave these numbers of 383 churches endured a total of 415 hostile incidences in 2024, which was a couple of years ago now. And they had armed incidences more than doubled from 12 to 28 in 2024. So wow. Churches are being more and more targeted for this. And this is just my theory and my thoughts and like somebody said, $20 will get you a Starbucks coffee. But I think this is the socialist Marxist people trying to infiltrate religion. They've been trying to corrupt religion. They're doing a good job. And a lot of the congregations, we're seeing social justice and woke Christianity like bloom like a flower. But I think they're trying to infiltrate the conservative Bible-believing churches like ours. They would if we were bigger and we were in Minneapolis, I'm sure. But they're trying to corrupt it, and they're trying to force strong-arm people to say, okay, social justice, yeah, okay, we can live with that. We'll change because we don't want to have to deal with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, up until now, it's been a soft, like there's been an invasion of the churches, but I think it's been more of a soft invasion where you have these people who have these ideologies that are sneaking in. So you see DEI sneaking into the church, social justice, those sort of things. You see them more and more churches take those stances. And I think that's kind of a soft invasion, so to speak. And now we're potentially seeing, a hard invasion, which means that, like I say, people are coming in and violently coming into the churches. And so hopefully the government will will do the right thing and arrest these people and bear the sword and make them pay for what they're doing, and it would deter others from doing it. I hope that's what they do. I hope that's what the government does, but I'm certainly not persuaded the Minnesota government's going to do that. The Minneapolis, St. Paul, or the state government, I don't think they're going to do it. I think the federal government's going to have to step in that situation and enforce the laws.
So what do you think about Doug Wilson? Like he kind of has, he moved to Idaho and his congregation, they kind of have a little town there where they have a lot of Christians that run the businesses. And is that something we should be thinking of? Maybe Grace Bible Church finding a little area, start building homes and, have our own little commune, kind of, not that we're, becoming Amish or anything, but,
No, I don't think we need to be doing that. Although I do think we need to be building alliances between one another that go further than the church walls and go further than just fellowship around the gospel. I do realize that has to be central of what we're doing, but I think we need to be building relationships that can survive when things do get tough, where we can be able to help each other. And, those who have property that, can grow stuff to help others with, can, raise chickens, raise cattle, that sort of thing. Yeah, I think that those kind of things we should be thinking strongly about in, being able to have access to those kind of things if something happens and there's, civil unrest and persecution and things that come along. So I'm not a proponent of, complete withdrawal from society. I don't think that's what God has called us to do. Christ said we need to be a light to the world, and I think we need to stay involved in the world. And withdrawing is not, I don't think what he would have us do. But he would also want us to be wise, and wisdom would say that we need to make sure that we're doing what we can do to protect ourselves. And it very well could be that having our own some people who are able to grow food and those sorts of things and have that ability to do that may be important going forward, or I think will be important.
You think we should start preparing because we have 3 years left of Trump's presidency? Do you think that in 2028, if AOC or someone, Harris, becomes president, that, I think we're in big trouble. I think we're in big trouble, but, do we want to prepare now just in case?
Yeah, the backlash is going to be incredible if that happens.
You always say the rubber binder, right?
The rubber band. It's going to snap back.
Yep.
Yeah. I the pendulum is going to swing hard if that happens. I mean, I pray it doesn't. Like that'd be in my mind, sitting in from the point of view I have today, it would be terrible if that happens. Although if it does happen, it's God's sovereignty, and I still trust in Him. And so, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Gavin Newsom or Tim Walz or whoever it is that becomes president, next president, and and I don't agree with them, and they do all these executive orders to undo everything that's been done and then go the other direction. I wouldn't want that, but I would also have to see it as God's sovereignty, and it will be difficult. And yes, I do think we need to be preparing for that if that happens.
Do you see us someday going underground? Like we'll have to maybe move to homes and just keep rotating?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean,
10 years, 15 years?
It's happened before, for sure. I mean, obviously we haven't seen it in the United States, but it's happened in other parts of the world, and it's happening today in other parts of the world. And so there's no reason to believe it couldn't happen here. And, I think we need to do our best to protect our First Amendment rights and, within the bounds of the law legally. But yeah, could it happen? Yeah, I could see it happening. And I think the what's going to happen if the Democrats get reelected and back in the majority, president and in Congress, I think what's going to happen is they're going to try to pack the court so that they control the Supreme Court, so they control all three branches of government. And I think that once that happens, it's done. We have no recourse. And so I think we need to be prepared for something like that if it does. And, I hate to say that. I mean, so could we be forced underground? Yeah, I think so. I think, well, what I was going to tell you is that what's going to happen is they're going to outlaw certain speech, and it's going to be basically speech that we're not going to obey. We're going to disobey their orders, and we're going to speak the way we, biblically, the way, we're going to speak against homosexuality as a sin. We're going to speak against, the transsexual movement. We're going to speak against those things, and when we do, it's going to become hate speech, and they're going to try to throw us in jail. And there may come a time where we have to go underground in order to avoid that. And, other churches have done it. So,
yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can become Grace Bible Church Greenland. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.